and then he coughs through the tracheotomy. There's a tube that comes out from the neck, going into his windpipe. So those are the things that I experienced with some of the hospice patients. But I like to go back, 45 years of my life, which I think conditioned me, prepared me for these situations. So I met Siddhartha when he was young, before he became a Buddha. He was a very curious person. He wanted to know what was going on outside of the palace where he lived. His father, King Suddhodana, and mother, Queen Maya. They waited 20 years before, his arrival. He couldn't have any children, as you know. So when he was born, he was a precious child, so they wanted to keep him, within the palace gate so that he wouldn't see outside what was going on. They didn't want him to see people dying or getting sick. So one day when he was about 29, he decided to go out of the palace gates to see what was going on. So he asked his servant Channa to, get Kantaka, his horse, his white horse. And then he went out to see what was really going on outside of the palace gates. He saw people get sick, and people that are dying. He saw funeral procession. So this was something that was actually taking place. Many of you might not be able to see some of the gruesome sights. So when you go to the hospital, some people are very afraid to touch the patient even. But this is really what is going on today. They're dying every moment. So after Siddhartha left the palace and he became monk, and when he became the Buddha, he taught me something about life. After he discovered the truth of life, he became my good friend as I read his book. Actually, he transformed my life. He taught me about karma, Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path. Taught me about interdependence, interrelationship. Those are very simple things which I am able to understand. I'm not a scholar. I haven't been to college, but just a lowly person that understood what he meant by causation. So he sort of made the foundation and the groundwork for me at that time. Then came Shinran Shonin, who was the most humble person and most honest person. He taught me about the Neibutsu way of life. He taught me about, he will accept me just as I am. Because in Jodo Shinshu, there is no calculation or contrivance or even setting a goal. There is no reason for complacency or inactivity. And because we have been driven, like I was being driven to be what I am, we are constantly on the move. Because life is movement. It is a ceaseless movement. When we come to a bridge, we don't build a house. we continue to mourn our journey. As the Reverend Yoshaki Fujitani had mentioned in one of his sermons, he said, we immerse ourselves in the members, and let it be a natural process. And we begin to saturate ourselves into it. When I say saturate, we don't just immerse and get saturated right away after the neck. That's the answer. We have to continue moving on to our journey. Because it takes time. It depends on how we listen, how much we read, how much we try to learn, how much experience we have with others, and the time, if you would like to include that also. So taking this in mind, I have only gratitude for my masters, for my spiritual teachers. So every morning I exercise. That keeps me healthy. I wake up on 4 in the morning and I jog for about 7 to 10 miles. After I finish, I take a bath, shower, then I rest for a while, and then I go in front of the altar to chant sutras. So I owe something to my teachers, my spiritual teachers. It's not only Shinran or Buddha, but Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Dandua, all the different masters, Genshin, Holy. So, Nembutsu is only gratitude, that's all. There is no contrivance. Just live each day. So when I light the candle, that is Amida to me. And the incense is my life burning away. It always reminds me of my life. So I also recite the poem every morning and evening. I have 3 poems, but the one that I like best is entitled Beginning Today. Morning and night I recite this poem. I will begin this day anew with the thought of becoming the person I'd like to be. If not completing the difficult journey today, at least getting a little further along the way. Today I will set aside some time just for me to plan, to dream, to be honest with myself about myself, to be better acquainted with this person that I am and this place that I call home. Today I will experience something new. I will learn from the world around me, the words I read, the sounds I hear, the touches I feel, the faces I see. Even through the course of my daily tasks, I will lean toward understanding and make this commonplace a wondrous place to be. So once again, I would like to go back to hospice and tell you the story about my most cherished experience with this patient. This patient was about 50 years old, a woman who came from Japan with her husband to live in California and then transferred to Hawaii. She had a 24-year-old daughter, and she was a single parent when she got sick. I used to visit her nearly every day for the last 3 weeks before she died. We became very good friends. And incidentally, she spoke fluent English, so we could communicate easily. She had cancer of the colon, but she still smoked cigarettes when she came to the hospice. And I used to hint her, to stop smoking. Why do you still smoke? First time was okay. She just listened to me. The second time I, mentioned this again. It's not good for your health, Stop lecturing me. My cancer is not in my lungs, it's in my colon. So then I didn't say any more after that. So, anyway, I should take her food now and then, she still enjoy whatever I took. She loved fruits, so I used to take fruits to her. But anyway, after a few weeks of seeing her, when I knew that her time was near, I went early in the morning to see her. It was about 7:30 in the morning. Her eyes were closed. She was facing the ceiling. I spoke to her, but there was no response. So, well, I kept talking to her. In the hospice, even the eyes are closed, in the last moment of their life, they can hear you. They can hear you. I'm sure they understand also. So I kept talking to her, massage her feet, got a damp towel, wiped her face, her neck, and her arms and hands. So about 11:30, I spoke to her and told her that I was going, leave her, and then, because I had to pick up my wife, to come here and take her home. So she was still looking up in the ceiling with her eyes closed. As I was walking out towards the door, I looked back once more to look at her. But this was the last time I'm going to see her again before she dies. So as I reached the door, I turned and looked at her. And then, her head was turned towards the door where I was leaving. So I rushed back to her and I held her hands and she told me, "Arigato." She whispered, "Arigato." So I said, "Sayonara." It really touched me when she did turn her head. Then when I took my wife home, and about 3:30 in the afternoon, I received a call from the nurse's station and they informed me that she had just passed away. But that's one of the most touching experiences that I had with a patient in hospice. But one day, a co-worker informed me, just I reached the hospice center. She told me that a certain patient just died. So why don't you see that patient? I said, okay. Then she told me how she looked. And she was so peaceful and beautiful. Then she suddenly asked me, "Are you Sune? Are you afraid to die?" "I'm not." Well, I thought for a moment, I said, well, I really don't know. Until the time comes, I won't know. So I will continue to listen to the world around me, the words that I read, the sounds I hear, the touches I feel, the faces I see. I'm still on my journey, so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tsunayoshi, another very important member of our community. And it must be the case that jogging gets easier as you get older. I'm up to about 3.5 miles now and anticipate improving upon that. Our next respondent this morning is the Reverend Myokan Shakti Khan, who is a Soto Zen priest and a social worker with Hospice Hawaii.
first came to Hawaii in 1981, I was on my way to Japan, and I made a couple of telephone calls to see if there would be any possibility of my negotiating an opportunity to service the population here in Hawaii as a Buddhist priest. At that time, I was told that I wouldn't live long enough to see that happen. Has been the tradition for the most part for the Soto to bring our priests from Japan. And so on my way back from Japan, I stopped and thought, well, maybe if I met a few people, they might change their mind. The time was right, but the people were not ready quite then. So because of that, I went back to California, and at that point, I decided I needed to go to work. And I was in San Francisco, and I looked in the paper, and there was this job called under sales for Eureka Fluid Works. So I had no idea what that would be, and I called them up, and I said, I'm interested in applying for your position. And they asked me if I was a good salesperson, and I said it depended on whether or not I believed in the product. So they sent me to the Post Street mortuary because it was embalming fluid. Well, because of this, I had made the appointment, but when I arrived at the mortuary school, the person with whom I was supposed to speak had run into a serious problem, as the person who was supposed to be teaching that class with the cadavers had not shown up, and so he was forced to take over the class. And at the school, mortician school, I guess you'd call it, you usually work there for about 6 or 8 months before they let you into this 1920s looking arena of marble slabs and cadavers. But unthinkingly, he said, oh, just follow me. And he motioned me on, and I went in, and I sat there. And there were 5 corpses. And then he called his little group together and wanted to have a little discussion with them, and asked me, oh, just go take a look. And I went around, and I noticed that a couple of the corpses were the bodies of people who were street people in their 50s and 60s. But the 2 bodies that interested me the most were 2 young men, one who was 32 and one who was 33. The 32-year-old had died from an overdose of drugs, and the 33-year-old, now this is 1981, looked as though he'd been in the Nazi concentration camp. And he had all these brown and purple spots on his body, and I thought, you know, this is really strange looking. At that point, we really didn't know anything about AIDS, and I believe at that point it was called GRID, which was gay immune related deficiency, I guess. So I sat there and I observed what was going on, and they went back and they began to work on this gentleman who had died of AIDS. But as I said, they didn't know, and they didn't have the precautions that they now have. In those days, the city had a contract, or the state had a contract with the mortuary school to pick, the mortuary school was to pick up all the indigent people or anyone who the morticians didn't want to service. And the morticians in San Francisco in 1981 were not servicing people who died from this strange new disease. And when I think back at the way this body was handled, it's frightening because nobody used gloves, nobody used the appropriate precautionary measures. And as I stayed there observing this for several hours, one of the things they did was that they sawed open the skull and removed the brain to have it tested at Stanford. And then they closed up the skull, they washed the hair and washed the body, and used this eureka fluid to embalm the corpse, stuffed the cheeks with cotton, prepared makeup for the face, and lo and behold, this really tragic-looking cadaver was an incredibly handsome young man. And I was so astonished to see the transformation. I was literally shocked. And the person who was conducting the class all of a sudden realized that I wasn't even supposed to be in there. And he rushed over to see me, and he was amazed that I was still sitting up. He said, "You didn't pass out." And I said, "No, but I felt sort of sick." And I did. I had felt rather nauseous at several moments. And then he got this bright idea, "Wouldn't you be interested in becoming a mortician? You'd probably be very good at this." Circumstances moved me into another direction. But I appreciated having my first encounter with AIDS in such a dramatic way, because I became very involved with what was happening, the difficulty that people with AIDS were having in getting any services, the way they were being treated. So it made, it gave me a focus in my disappointment for not being able to serve the Soto Mission in Hawaii. So that was quite exciting. When I came back to Hawaii, and I was married here in Hawaii, and I was married at the Soto Mission, or actually not the Soto Mission, but at the Diamond Sangha. And Ape Hiroshi married my husband and myself. And I did not know at the time that we were married. My husband was a hemophiliac, and he didn't know, but within 2 weeks of our marriage, he became very ill. And for the rest of our marriage, he became progressively more ill and died of AIDS. Being a hemophiliac, the gene runs in the female, and it's transferred to the males who get the disease of hemophilia. And shortly thereafter, all the men in his family died within a couple of years. And his mother, who felt so guilty, drank herself to death. So the only person, male left in the family, is his father, who did not, of course, have hemophilia because it was contracted through his mother. And, you know, the questions began coming up where people were talking about, well, you know, it's one thing to serve the people who get the disease that are innocent and the people who are guilty. And it's really important for us to realize as service providers that it has nothing to do with how a person gets the disease. The person is ill. They are in desperate need of care. They're in desperate need of love. They're in desperate need of being helped to feel as normal as they can feel under those circumstances. Well, recently, after my husband died, I realized that I had planned to get a PhD in Buddhist studies at some point, and that was not going to be feasible. So we had moved back to Hawaii, and he died in Hawaii. And the reason for that was that he had grown up in Asia, although he was a Scotsman by birth, Scottish descent, but his father had opened up Reynolds Metals of Asia and was president of Metals of Asia. So my husband grew up between the Philippines and Japan. Anyway, so we came back here, and he died here in Hawaii. And I went back to school, and he didn't want anyone to know he was ill. He was the one who figured out what he had. He was a physicist, and he'd gone to several doctors, and they couldn't tell him what was wrong, and he thought he had allergies. He went to an allergist, and they gave him allergy shots, and he got a little better, and then he got worse and became allergic to the allergy shots. And then he asked the allergist to do a blood test, which the poor allergist couldn't read. So my husband took the blood test over to UH. They have a wonderful medical library, and they had the latest books on how to read a blood test. And he came home very excited, telling me that he had either had HIV or AIDS. And that was the scientist in him, that he had discovered the problem, and then of course to follow through, he went and was tested. In those days, it was very hard to get tested. When we went together to be tested, they looked at us and said, well, you know, you look like such a nice middle-class couple, and you're older, and, you know, we really don't think, basically they didn't want to spend the money to give us the test, but it was very difficult to say no to my husband. So we got our test, and he was positive, and I was negative, and he was, of course, very grateful for that. Anyway, after he died, I went back to UH, and I got my master's in social work and had the opportunity to do a practicum at hospice, which I adored. It just seems to have been the appropriate work for me. I couldn't be a Buddhist priest here. I could at least be a hospice worker. I worked with hospice for a while, and then I went to the Big Island, and I worked with the AIDS Project in its initial stages, and I worked with hospice for a while. And then a few years ago, I was called back and requested to join the Betsuin because the time has come for me to become a priest here in Hawaii to service this community, because the younger generation, for the most part, no longer speaks Japanese, at least not fluently. So after I went back to the university, I received more training in Buddhism from Professor Tanabe, who was a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and Dr. Baroni, from whom you'll hear later, who is a fabulous teacher also, and both of whom, to whom I'm immensely grateful. They've given me many new perspectives on Buddhism that I had not had before entering their classes, although I had studied Buddhism for many, many years. Anyway, I finished my certificate that was required by the Soto Mission and wrote the papers that they needed to submit to the Shumocho in Japan, and went on to take a licensing for being a licensed social worker here in the state, which was in CSW. And then the opportunity opened for me to work at the hospice here, and I was delighted. And I want to tell you about one young man who died of AIDS. I call him Manju, after Manju Bodhisattva. I didn't find out till after he was dead that his family called him Manju after the little cakes that the Japanese people eat when he was small, because he was very chubby. But they let me know this after he was dead, and I would talk about him at my temple, and I would refer to him as Manju because of the issue of confidentiality. When I first met Manju, he was very angry and bitter. He was living in his mother's home with his partner, and he was in despair because his grandmother wouldn't see him, said, oh, he was evil, that he deserved to die from this disease, he'd done terrible things, and she wouldn't talk to him. And his aunts and uncles wouldn't come and visit him. And his father hadn't seen him in 10 years. And he was just so bitter. So we talked, and he had a leaning toward Buddhism, but he had studied all kinds of religion and was an extremely spiritual person, didn't even realize it. So we decided to start a practice, and he began to meditate. And his meditation was on two things: compassion and wisdom. And with what little strength he had, he would get up every day, and he was maybe 65, 70 pounds, and he would get on his walker, and he'd walk around the house saying compassion and wisdom, compassion and wisdom. And over a few months, he had absolutely miraculous changes in him. And as he changed, everything around him changed. And his father, who hadn't been in the home for 10 years, came to visit him. Then he decided, we had set up an altar, and every day, every morning he would get up and he would sift his incense, burner clean, and then light incense and prepare his altar for the day, put the flowers on, light the incense, say his prayers, and meditate. And very slowly he came to terms, actually it was not that slowly, over 3.5 months, came to terms with the fact that he was dying, and really forgave all the members of his family who couldn't bring themselves to open their hearts to him. Anyway, I took very ill and almost died myself when he died, and he had wanted me to do the funeral. And I couldn't even stand up, so his family and I spoke on the phone, which was very hard for me to do because at that time I had sort of a 3-car collision within me. I had the flu, I had pneumonia, and I had abscessed teeth, and the poison was traveling toward my heart and my brain. So I couldn't stand up. But we arranged to have the funeral through hospice. We're an interfaith operation. And a Lutheran minister at hospice, who was our chaplain, did the funeral in a Buddhist setting because Manju wanted to be a Buddhist and had become a Buddhist. And they tell me it was the most wonderful funeral, that there was a professional singer, Hawaiian singer, Mr. Kalakini, who was there, and just spontaneously got up and chanted a Hawaiian chant. People walked away from this funeral saying what a wonderful funeral it was. They had never seen anything like it. And of course, I was sorry to have missed it, but I did have the opportunity later when I was better to do his 49th day service. And since then, I've been working with his family. He died on the 22nd of the month, and in Japan, that's the 23rd. While I was sick, he began to appear to me. It was the day he died, I had turned on the radio and I was listening to Wagner's Ring Cycle, and then that faded out, and he appeared in front of me. And he appeared as Manjushri on the lion. And I looked at him, and I didn't recognize him at first, and then he smiled. And I said, "Scott, Manju, holy heavens, what are you doing here?" And he says, "I came to see you." And I said, "Oh?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "But I would have thought you would have come as Kanon-sama." And he says, "Well, Shakti, you always think of Kanon as being female." And he put his hands on his hips and he said in a sassy way, "I like the masculine type." So at that point, 1,000 arms of Kanon rose out behind him. And he took me on an incredible journey where I was able to see him. He showed me numerous Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and his spirit jumping in and out, moving from one to the other. And as it would enter one, it would be activated, and then it would leave and activate the next one. So we had a very intimate relationship after his death. And he told me that he was going to return as a monk. And he said he was going to come back not as Manju Bodhisattva, but as Jizo, who is the protector of crossroads and carer of children, and the person who, or the Bodhisattva who leads people out of hell. And what I didn't realize is that when we had the ceremonies, he was a very classy guy. He wanted Dom Perignon at his 49th day ceremony. So we had these beautiful Chinese ceremonial cups that were carved maybe 150 years ago. And every member of the family received one. And we drank out of these cups, and we had one for him. And each cup was put into a little sacred bag, a handmade pouch. And every 22nd of the month, wherever the family is, no matter where they are in the United States, they synchronize their clocks, and at the time of his death, which was 5/22, they all carry their cups, and they have a toast, and they say prayers for their brother, for their cousin, for her son. And for his son, the father also has a cup and celebrates the life. And you know, people talk about the final stages and they talk about dying, and I really see it slightly differently. I see it as the final stages of living, and that is probably because I'm a follower of Dogen Zenji. But there's life and there's death, and in this transformation, you know, in a sense, we die many times. The baby that we were 40 years ago, for those of you who are at least 40 years old, and the ones of you who didn't exist 40 years ago, you're not the same person at 10, at 20, at 30 as you were as a baby. It's a new person, so there's something different and something the same. And so with life, you know, there's that feeling for me that it's not a question of really death, but a question of transition. And my husband once told me, as a physicist, that they're finding out that the energy in the universe was constant, and that nothing was ever gained or lost, but only in a state of flux or change. And that really coincides with the Buddhist belief. And so here I am finally, reaching my 57th birthday, very happily ensconced as a priest at the Soto Mission, very happily ensconced as a hospice social worker, and very happy to be before you today and having the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Khan. We've moved this morning from the theoretical and the conceptual to particular human narratives, and it seems entirely appropriate that we should do so. Unfortunately, given our time constraints, I have a note from powers greater than myself that says that dinner must be served at 12 o'clock sharp. So we're going to have to forgo the formal question session, but you will have the opportunity in informal conversation to talk to our speakers in the second panel. Please join me in thanking Dr. Daman, in thanking Mr. Miyashiro, and in thanking Reverend Khan for their contribution. Last but not least, let me thank the Hongwanji Mission and Reverend Benetto for hosting us this morning. Lunch is served.
Next, we'll have Reverend Oscar with Tendai mission to demonstrate the Tendai Tokyo and explain what they would have done.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and bodhisattvas. Today, I'd like to introduce Tendai funeral ceremony, or Tendai funeral ritual. My name is Jishin Osuka, and then today I have fortunately assistant Reverend Namiki. He came from Japan 2 weeks ago, so today we chant first time with together. I hope everybody received this golden paper about the first describe the history of Tendai Buddhism. And then the second page is the Tendai funeral ceremony. So I'd like to follow all this order. Now you listen, Shomyo, that is a Buddhist song, or actually Buddhist hymn, transmitted from China to Japan about 8th century. So this means Tendai tradition continued over 1200 years. So we are just chant. And then he hit that is called nyo. Okay? Then that symbol is very different. So sound was a little bit, what do I say, low, but very heavy, not symbol like Western music. It's very different. So now I would like to start sit and then start ritual. Today, my purpose is to reveal the secret to you. So some portion I cannot to explain in front of the public, but as much as I can, I'd like to explain what is going on. Okay? So we have only 15 minutes. So usually our Tendai tradition, funeral ceremony takes about 1 hour. So I have to very squeeze into 15 minutes. Once enter the ascent to the main seat and start ritual. There are two major rituals here. First is a protection. Tendai, as you know, Tendai Buddhism has 4 basic elements. One is Lotus Sutra tradition. Second is esoteric tradition. Third is Zen tradition or meditation. And fourth is a precept. Then first, I'd like to utilize the esoteric tradition. That is the start ritual. First, we're going to protect our body and spirit. Okay? Then, Goshinbo, this is starting the lotus flower to start the open. Then open. Then the flower is blossom. And then we're going to tie. Then next is the Goshinbo. So 5 elements: head, shoulder, heart, and throat. From the spiritual world, we have to protect. And then, this is called kanji. Only thumb or parent's finger and the pointer. This is open the gate, and then every spirit go away. This is a first ritual in front of the altar. Then next, we're going to purify. This is also using esoteric Buddhism, the pure water. Okay, so pure water, you can understand what is pure water. But I tell you how to make the pure water. So water plus incense, special incense input. This is my master told me. If I make the pure water, I have to keep for my life. No need to throw away one time. So we can put new fresh water and then put the incense again. So we can keep continuously. So this is my master told me. So I'm going to use pure water made by special incense. Then first we're going to first I have to concentrate the letter of Ram, and then Lamban, 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 Lamban. That means purify. Then 6th place. First north, east, south, west, above, and below. So then purify our setting. Then we're going to start the chant. next statement including history of the deceased person. Then next, initiation of three refugee. So I'd like to give the English translation for you. Now I wish forever to take refuge in Buddha and his 2 feet, worthy one. I take refuge in Dharma to be free from desire. I take refuge in Sangha to be free from desire. I finally take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Then we repeat 3 times. Then we're going to chant the Amita Sutra. Only 1 verse, just I'd like to chant. Sen Abita Ei Joshi Gaben Yeshibu Saisha Egeki Shuki Kotoku Eirokai Ijushu Senji Haki Goshuji Kukai Shikai Arakan Shusoji Shiki Choro Shari Baka Hoken Baka Kasho Baka Kasanen Baka Kuchirari. And next, this is the main point for the funeral ritual. In Japanese called Indo. So this time we're going to give the 3 pure precepts and offering Buddhist name. But the Tendai tradition focus on offering Buddhist name is supposed to be during alive, your flesh and body. Yeah. But unfortunately, in the society, everybody is busy during their career. So they don't have a chance to become official Buddhist disciple. So that this time we're going to give the Buddhist name. Plus 3 pure precepts mean first keep precept, then next is encouraging to precept, then finally to to helping other people. Such kind of pure precept. But the Tendai tradition is based on Fanwan Chin in Japanese Bonmokyo, 10 major precepts and 48 minor precepts. But we want to give 3 pure precepts at this time. Then giving the holy Buddhist name. Then depend on the order is changeable, like Amitabha Sutra, Indo, and individual offering incense. So depend on the situation we can arrange. And then finally we have about 2 minutes. The recite Nembutsu. There are 2 kinds of Nembutsu we have. So first I'd like to chant the traditional Nembutsu, then ordinary Nembutsu. Okay? This is about 1200 years Tendai mission, Tendai school is transmitting. Then next, ordinary Nembutsu. 光明返上四方世界念仏行世主者 finally Tendai mission or Tendai school using the 108 rosary. Then we're going to, what should I say, transferring mail to everybody. Okay? If I give go out, this means you're going to receive. And then in front of Buddha, I'm going to receive the spiritual power this way. So this is it. Thank you very much. Just on time.
That was a short lesson in Tokyo. So physicist says, if you'd like to have the longer version, then come to the temple. It's located at 23 Jack Lane. It's right next to Temple Emmanuel. It gives you some flavor, at least, of the rituals that we have for our funeral services. And the altar is one that enshrines Amida Buddha. These are the characters. It says Namu Amida Buddha in Chinese. Namu Om Kyo. Sometimes you see a picture of the standing Buddha. All right, we'll move on to the next. We don't want to take too much time away from our next speaker. Dr. Helen Baroni is with the religion department at the University of Hawaii, and she was born in Connecticut. That word is so hard for me to say, Connecticut. So Helen says, say New England. It might be easier to say. And while the handymen are moving the tables, let me continue. And Dr. Baroni received a PhD from Columbia University. And she studied also in Japan. She says not at Tokyo University, but at Hanazono. Maybe some of you know that. It is a Zen school in Kyoto. I mentioned to her that I knew a professor at Hanazono Daigaku, Professor Ogata, who was at the University of Chicago when I was there. And it is a very good school. And so when Ogata Sensei came, the University of Chicago was very happy to receive him. At that time, this was many, many years ago, so Dr. Joachim Bach was professor of history of religions there. And we did have a lot of fun. Dr. Baroni's specialty is in the study of Obaku Zen. We hear of Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen, but Obaku is perhaps a stricter form of Rinzai Zen, and she has that as her specialty. So Dr. Baroni will speak on ties that bind, ongoing relationships between the living and the dead in Japanese culture. So if Dr. Baroni will come forward, and Reverend Shigenori Makino and Reverend Robert Nakamura, please come forward also. And they will be the respondents.
Good afternoon. I want to start by telling you how I decided on my topic for today. This past semester, I had a student in one of my introductory classes on Japanese religion. And she came to me one day and she said that she had a serious matter she wanted to talk to me about. She wanted my help with. She was having problems with a recurring nightmare. And it was coming more and more often. And it was beginning to overwhelm her. It was all that she could think about. So that she was actually afraid that it was going to interfere with her studies at this point in the semester. In her dream, an aunt, you have to excuse me, I'm from New England, that's actually how we say that word all the time. An aunt of hers had died a number of years ago, and this aunt was coming to her in the dream as a spirit. So that in the dream, she knows that her aunt is dead. When I dream about relatives who have died, they're always still alive. In this case, no. It was clear that the spirit was dead. And what she wanted to tell her niece was that she was lonely, extremely lonely. And the student said that this distressed her. She wanted to know whether or not it was true. Is her aunt suffering? Is she lonely? And if she is, why was she calling on her to help? Some of her friends had said that she should go to see a Buddhist priest here in town who knows how to handle these situations. But her mother had suggested that maybe what she should do is seek the help of a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And so my friend was now even more, or my student was even more concerned because perhaps she actually was suffering from a psychological problem. So she didn't really know what to do, and so she decided to come to ask for my advice. Well, I didn't know what to do because I'm not a priest and I'm not a counselor, and I didn't really know what help I could offer her. So in good academic fashion, I decided to tell her academically how I thought that her dream might be interpreted within the context of the Japanese cultural milieu. I should give you a little background. This student of mine, she and her immediate family are Buddhist, but her aunt was, I think, Southern Baptist. She was a Christian in any case, and she had been buried according to Christian rites, so that no one in the family was doing the traditional series of memorial services, Buddhist memorial services, that would ordinarily be done when a Japanese dies. And so I should tell you that in a Japanese context, the failure to do that cycle of services can be thought of as a breach, a breakdown in the relationship between the living family and the family who has already died. And so that it was possible that this was the cause of the problem, that her aunt was coming to ask for help with this. The relationship between the living and the dead is said to be reciprocal. There's a sense in which the living aid the dead, and the dead in response aid the living. It is also possible, and this point is sometimes a little controversial in Buddhist contexts, it's sometimes said that not only can we aid one another, each side of the divider of death, but that also a certain harm can be done. The living can harm the dead can harm the living. So that it would be possible within the Japanese context to interpret her dream either as harm, well, I'll talk about some of the other possibilities as I go along, but at least that a breach had occurred in the relationship and that the breach needed to be healed, and that that was one way that her dream could be interpreted. She did actually seek the help of a Buddhist priest, and she actually feels a lot better now, she told me. So the dream has gone away. What I want to do today is I want to spell out, in general terms, not in much detail, how the Japanese view the relationship between the living and the dead, and the rituals that mark that relationship, that ongoing relationship. It doesn't end with the funeral service as it does in some religious traditions. It's a very long process that goes on. And I also want to talk about some of the interpretations of the rituals that are provided. The interpretation are like an intricately woven web. Some of the strands are Buddhist, some of the strands are Shinto, some of the strands come from various parts of the folk tradition. Most of the strands, the dominant portion of the tradition, is in fact Buddhist. Most Japanese, when they die, go, or well, I guess when you're dead you don't. What happens when most Japanese die is the family typically goes to the Buddhist temple for services. That's the norm. Shinto, in fact, regards death as pollution, as a form of pollution, so that Shinto funeral services are quite rare and really didn't happen very much before the Meiji period, when it became, they were created in effect, but they're still very rare. So the dominant portion of the tapestry we'll be talking about is Buddhist, but it's very clear that there's a good bit of other interpretation going on as well. Okay. Now, in general terms, there are two kinds of rituals or observances that the living use to commemorate, to honor the dead within the Japanese culture. One set is linear, and the other set is cyclical. What I mean by linear is they have a clear beginning point in time, and that's the time of death, and they continue at specified intervals over a long number of years, but then in fact they end. There are these linear services that are offered, that a family will offer for an individual member of the family who has died. Cyclical observances happen on an annual basis. It follows the calendar, so that they go on year in and year out. And for these, it isn't individuals that are being honored, but all of the ancestors, all of the deceased relatives as a whole will be honored at the cyclical events, with one specific case that I'll mention as we go along. There's almost always an exception. But in general, you can think of the linear services as being for individuals and the cyclical services being for the whole of the ancestors. Now, at the time of death, typically what happens is the family, and I guess we heard about this a little bit this morning, the Buddhist priests would appreciate hearing the call a little earlier, but in any case, at the time of death, as soon as possible, the family will invite a priest to come, and the priest will say a brief prayer. Usually the face of the deceased is covered. That prayer is called the Pillow Sutra, or Makurakyo. That's what the term means, Pillow Sutra, because it's meant to be a deathbed service. It's meant to be said just as soon after death as possible. These days it's often performed at the hospital. Now, that custom is not really all that ancient. It actually only goes back to the Tokugawa period, which is a period I study. During the Tokugawa period, the government, in its desire to control Christianity, required that a Buddhist priest examine every deceased body, every dead body, and fill out a form, of course, fill out a report before a death certificate could be issued, and then permission for burial could be received. So that apparently this Pillow Sutra dates from this time, and it became quite universal then as a part of examining the body, very naturally to say a sutra, read some verses over the body. After that time, the body is prepared for burial, whatever form that will take. I don't want to talk about all the details. There are a lot of traditions for how the body is treated. It's washed and dressed. It will be laid out in a particular manner. The head will face north. What's important, I guess, in a sense, symbolically about all these things, is that the dead is treated in a way that is inverted from the way we deal with the living. And this is consistent, and members of the Japanese community perhaps will realize this will sound very familiar to you. You don't normally sleep with your head to the north. The dead are laid to rest in that position, and other things that are opposite from when one is alive are done in preparing the body and during the funeral services. One other thing I want to say about the funeral, and this is by no means unique to Japan, but the funeral is an opportunity to celebrate, if you will, relationships among the living community. So that it isn't just family members and friends who will attend a funeral, but also representatives or members of societies, groups, etc., that the dead person was a member of and that family members belong to will also come to the funeral as well to reestablish those ties. So that, for example, we had a member of the department, the religion department, a father died, and at that time the chair of the department, George Tanabe, who spoke earlier today, he served as our representative at the funeral service, so that our department was represented despite the fact that of course this person had not been a member, but the child was a member of it. Now traditionally, the primary period of mourning, and you've heard reference to it before, and I'll talk a good bit about it, the primary period of mourning continues from the time of death for 49 days. And those 49 days are marked by a sequence of seventh-day services. Every 7 days, traditionally, a service would be held. So there's the first seventh day, the second seventh day, which is the 14th day, and so on. These services are Buddhist in content and in form, although I should mention that there are some parts of the 49 days that look very Shinto to my eyes. This is part of Shinto tradition being blended in. I've already said that Shinto regards death as polluting, and during those 49 days, the immediate family is traditionally thought of as in some sense, polluted by that connection with death. So that during that mourning period, members of the immediate family traditionally weren't supposed to go to Shinto festivals. They really weren't supposed to go to public events at all. They were supposed to contain the pollution that they had experienced in a way, and stay out of large public gatherings. Now, the Japanese have become a lot less concerned about these pollution issues in the modern period, but there are some of the traditions therefore have sort of fallen away, and I don't think many people observe the 49 days very strictly any longer. But there are some rituals that still indicate to us that pollution is an issue in relationship with the funeral, with the process of memorializing the dead. That is that most people after attending a funeral will still put salt on themselves to purify themselves. And one of my students says very often you receive a packet of salt as you depart the funeral, so that you can do that, so that, you know, in case you've forgotten. Salt is a purifying element in Shinto, so that's a Shinto element that comes into the funeral. In any case, all the entire process of the 49-day services, these Buddhist services, are thought of as a purifying process for everybody concerned, for the family members, and most especially for the spirit of the deceased. I should say I'm going to be drawing mostly on my knowledge of Zen, the Zen tradition, for talking today. I think in the basic contours, most of what I'm going to say is in keeping, at least in the broad sense, with other denominations, but the respondents will be able to clarify some of the differences that do exist, especially since I know that some changes have occurred here in the Hawaiian Japanese community. Now, part of the funeral arrangements include, and we've already heard about this, a posthumous name, a death name, a Buddhist name for the deceased. It's called, one of the names that's used in Japanese is kaimyo. The word kaimyo means precept name. It's usually given on the seventh day, the first seventh-day service, so the seventh day after death. And that's the name that a monk or a nun would receive at ordination when they receive the precepts. And so it's a precept name. And as you've already heard, most Japanese receive that name after death. So symbolically, they're taking the tonsure. Symbolically, they're becoming monks and nuns. And from the first seventh-day service, from that service on, the funeral service will in fact treat them as a monk or a nun. Indeed, there were no traditional memorial services, at least within the Zen community, before it arrived in Japan for lay people. There were traditional services for ordinary monks and for abbots. And when they arrived in Japan and they needed to develop a funeral ceremony for lay people, what they did was they modified the ceremony that had been used for ordinary monks and nuns. And so they ordained the person symbolically on the first day, and then they follow the ordinary service for a monk. The posthumous name will be written on a memorial tablet. The memorial tablet in Japanese is ihai or ihai. And the family will keep that for a number of years as a physical symbol for the person who has died. The tablet eventually, actually quite quickly, is going to be placed on a family Buddhist altar, a butsudan. But that doesn't happen until after the 49th day. There's a sense in which even the ihai, this physical symbol for the deceased, is polluted and needs the purification process of those 7 7-day services done over the 49 days before it would be appropriate to put it up on a shelf next to the existing ihai, if there are any. So there's still this interest in pollution that's here that we don't really see within the ancient Buddhist tradition. It isn't what we come into contact with from the outside that pollutes us in the ancient Buddhist tradition. Contact with blood would not necessarily be polluting. It's internal attachments or behavior that we manifest that would be a problem rather than contact from the outside. But we can see that in the Japanese context, purity and pollution are a serious concern. After the 49th day service, the family is going to hold a series of memorial services traditionally. There'll be a 100th day service. First anniversary is the most important after the 49th day. 100th day service, first anniversary of death, 3rd, 7th. It's really easy to come up with the numbers because they're all the numbers with 3s and 7s. 3, 7, 13, 17, 23, 27. There are some variations in denominations. And the 33rd, in many cases, is the last service. In some cases, the 50th year will mark the end. But whichever is the marking the end, there will be a final annual memorial service for a specific individual. At that time, after that service, the family will dispose of the ihai, the memorial tablet. I think most of the time they give them back to the temple, but there are a variety of ways to dispose of it properly. And then in most cases, in most people's minds, the person who died no longer has individual characteristics. They've passed into a sort of a general category of ancestors now. They've been purified enough so that they've lost their individual characteristics. And they're only going to be memorialized at the annual cyclical events. It also makes a lot of sense because after 33 or 50 years, there are very few people left in the community who have any real memory of that individual person. So there's a sort of sense in the limiting of how many years the memorial services will go on. Okay, a few words about the collective services. There are 3 or 4 times a year when the deceased are remembered, when the ancestors are remembered as a group. These are Higan, or the equinoxes in spring and then in the autumn. There's Obon, and sometimes New Year's. In some parts of Japan, at least, New Year's is still celebrated in memorializing the dead. At each of these festival periods, it's traditional for a family to visit the family grave, to clean it, and then to make offerings there at the grave. They'll offer fresh flowers, incense, water, a special food, something of this variety. And of the times I've mentioned, the most important is clearly Obon. So I'll say a little bit more about the Bon festival. Bon is based on a festival celebrated throughout East Asia. It's the Buddhist festival or ceremony of Ulambana. That ceremony was designed as a way to save those living beings who are suffering in hell as hungry ghosts. For those of you who aren't familiar with what a hungry ghost is, it's one of the existences that is possible within the 6 levels of being. Hungry ghosts are always hungry. They have tremendously large stomachs, and their throats are like a needle, so that they can get very little in, so that they are perpetually hungry. They're called in Japanese gaki. So this ceremony was designed originally to alleviate their suffering. The tradition says that one of the Buddha's leading disciples, we call him in Japanese Mokuren, he approached the Buddha to ask his advice. He wanted to help his mother, his deceased mother. Mokuren had amazing powers because of his Buddhist practice. And after his mother died, he wanted to know what had happened to her. And so he traveled through the realms looking for her, and he eventually found her suffering as a gaki, as a hungry ghost. And he, because of his power, was able to travel down to where she was, and he offered her food and water to alleviate her suffering. And the story goes that when she took his offering of food, it turned to fire in her mouth, so that he couldn't feed her directly. He couldn't help her himself. So he went to the Buddha and he asked the Buddha what he should do. And the Buddha said that at the end of the rainy season retreat, when the merit that the community, the Sangha, the monks and nuns had built was at its highest peak, at the end of that ceremony, or that ritual period, he should offer the Sangha a feast. And that way, symbolically at least, that would be able to ease the suffering for the hungry ghosts, suffering in hell. Now in Japan, the focus of Obon is much less on hungry ghosts and much more on ancestors. So let me tell you a little bit about how ancestors are celebrated at this festival. It's said, well, traditionally, Japanese are supposed to travel back to their native village at Obon. And the idea is that they will be there then to welcome back their ancestors who come back for a yearly visit, if you will. According to the folk tradition, the spirits of the deceased normally live either in the mountains or out to sea. They're very vague. I'll talk about this in a little bit. They're very vague where they actually are. But at Obon, they come home for a visit. They come back to the land of the living for a visit. Symbolically, two offerings are made at this time, cucumbers and eggplant. The cucumber is said to represent a horse. And the idea is that when they're coming back to the land of the living, we want them to travel very quickly. So we give them a horse to get back on. And then the eggplant represents a cow. When they actually leave to go back, we want them to go slowly so that we can say a nice long goodbye at the end. Anyway, that's the story of the offerings. There are also lanterns that will be lighted at the beginning to light the way of the ancestors coming back, and lanterns lit at the end to see them off so that they go. In the in-between period, between welcoming them and seeing them off, there will be typically Obon dancing, bonodori, which is entertainment for both the living and the dead traditionally. And in general, it's supposed to be somewhat festive, although there's always some bittersweet element because of the recently deceased. I should say that a lot of Japanese participate today in Obon as a very secular holiday. I bet a lot of the Buddhists in the room celebrate Christmas. There's a lot of Japanese who celebrate Obon in a very secular manner, and so they may dance at Obon without really thinking of it as a religious service of any sort. Anyway, the other thing that we see, I mentioned that there's one special practice that singles out individual spirits at the end, at the cyclical events, and that's at Obon for the recently deceased. Anybody who's died in the year since the last Obon will be especially remembered at their first Obon. It's a special one for the recently dead. A special altar may be set up for their ihai. And at the end of the festival, really after we've said goodbye to all the other spirits, then lanterns will be lighted, special lanterns that are released into usually a river or perhaps the ocean, and are sent out, offered to the recently deceased to see them off for the first Obon. It's the first time they go off then with the rest of the ancestors. Now here in Honolulu, I've seen it done at the Alawai. And I have to say there's only one little problem with that, and that is that they don't actually go out to sea when they go on the Alawai. There's a tradition in a lot of parts of Japan that if those shodo nagashi, those lanterns for the recently dead, if they go out and then come back on the tide, then that means that the harvest will be bad, because Obon is right before the harvest. So I don't know what this means, but we put them in the Alawai and they pick them up at the other end. Anyway, a few changes here. Okay, now some of the positive interpretations for these rituals. I want to talk about what do these rituals indicate about the relationship between the living and the dead. So to begin with, there is a positive and mutually beneficial relationship that's indicated by these events. The bond of devotion and filial piety that exists between living parents and living children is the pattern on which we can see filial obligation continuing between the living and the dead. It's an ongoing process. We feel an obligation to our predecessors, and so we make offerings for their sake, and then in turn we receive blessings back from them. We receive benefits from them. So that the living family is thought of as offering services that ultimately lead to the deceased relative becoming either an enlightened being, a Buddha, or perhaps a kami, or an ancestor spirit. And the spirits of the dead continue to come back and visit and protect their living, surviving family. Focusing a little bit on the Buddhist strands of this tapestry. The funeral services, say the ones during the 49 days, those are designed to build merit. Rebirth is based on karma, but this merit can be transferred, it's believed, during this period in particular, to the deceased. Because during the 49-day period, the spirit has not yet taken on its next, whatever its next form will be. This is an intermediate period. And so during that time, services are offered in the hopes that you can ensure a better birth, rebirth, for the person who has died, perhaps rebirth in the Pure Land, Amida Pure Land. I will say that the Shinshu sect, the Shin tradition, does deny this interpretation, and I think that Reverend Makino might have something to say about this issue. They will openly say they are doing the services for the sake of the living rather than just for the sake of a better rebirth. Now, even though Buddhism does teach this idea of reincarnation so that you would want to ensure a better rebirth for the person who's died, there are aspects of Japanese popular tradition that suggest that that's not exactly what Japanese believe. To begin with, the term used for the spirits of the dead, or for the dead, is hotoke, which is a term that, as it is written and as it is spoken both ways, means the Buddha, or a Buddha, an enlightened being. So there's a sense in which the dead become Buddhas or enlightened beings just by dying and having the memorial services spoken for them. There's some sense in saying that. And there are also indications that there's a belief in Japan that the dead go on existing forever as spirits living in a world of the dead, not being reborn continually until they attain enlightenment. Let me talk a little bit about some of the Shinto understandings of the memorial process, where this comes from, I think. In this sense, the family is said to assist the dead spirit in becoming one of the benevolent ancestors who helps the living family. At the beginning of the process, the spirit is polluted by the very experience of death, and so the Buddhist rituals are used in order to wash away that pollution, purify the spirit in a progressive manner, until eventually, when the whole process is done, the dead spirit is thought of, the hotoke, the Buddha, in a sense becomes a kami, or an ancestor who protects the family. So there's that understanding of the process, and that person the ancestors come back on a yearly basis, as it were, to visit and protect. Before I talk a little bit about negative interpretations, I want to talk about where the dead reside. I already mentioned that there's some people say that they live in the mountains or at sea. In Shinto concepts of the world, cosmology, there's a plane of heaven above us where the kami live. There's the world of the living where we are, and there's a world of the dead, which is sort of vague for exactly where that is. But the three worlds are not completely separate, and there can be movement between them, interaction between them. So there's also this sense that the spirits stay in the world of the dead forever, coming back on a yearly basis for visits. We see this, in fact, in the way the memorial tablet is treated. Once the process is over, it can be disposed of. There are also traditions that suggest that that Japanese believe that the spirit is in some sense present at the gravesite. Offerings are made at the gravesite, or at the place where a death happened, especially if it's accidental. Maybe some of you remember back in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, a big jumbo jet flew into a mountain in Japan, a very steep slope. To this day, there are family members, surviving family members, who make very difficult treks to the site of that plane crash in order to place offerings there at that site. Why are they doing that? Well, when newspapers have asked them, they have indicated that one father in particular has been interviewed a bit, and he says that his son died in the crash, and he feels that his son is there waiting for him. And if he weren't to go and visit, then his son would be lonely. So that he feels that his son is longing for his company. The dead rely upon the living, and he has to go there in order to help him. This is probably despite memorial services held in the usual way. Okay, very briefly now, a few comments about the sort of darker side. I've only talked about positive parts or interpretations of the relationship. Now, some people will maintain that the dead would never come back and hurt the living, that the dead would never harm surviving family, for example. They would only protect them. But there are customs and folk traditions that suggest that this may not be universal. There may be other beliefs. To begin with, there are some spirits that pose a potential threat to the living. For example, vengeful spirits, wandering spirits, muen otoke, the newly dead, especially those who die in some unnatural way. The folk tradition maintains that the body and the spirit are separate, that they part at death, but that the spirit will remain in the vicinity of the body for a little while, maybe during those 49 days before the spirit takes on its next state, whatever that will be. In any case, during an unstable period, right after death, there's a little bit of danger. In particular, a spirit might get kind of lost and might linger too long and not know how to proceed. Now, a person who dies without surviving family, and this is why the pre-death rituals were sometimes done, or a person whose family forgets to take care of them and offer the services, might fall into this situation. These are pitiful figures because the dead rely on the living in order to be helped. At Obon, there are still offerings made to take care of them. I'm getting a signal from the back. Time? Okay, all right. I will cut it short a little bit, just to say that there are negative possibilities. I'll stop with one rather sweet story that suggests that it isn't always harm that the dead bring, but bringing it back to the dream that my student had. There's a story in the Yugetsu Monogatari in which the spirit of a woman haunted, I guess you'd say it's her ghost, haunted her husband. She didn't mean to harm him at all. According to the story, the man is a businessman and he leaves his wife, and when they part, she's worried that he won't come home. And so he promises he will be back by the fall. He goes off to Kyoto, to the capital, and a war breaks out, and he isn't able to come home for many, many years. Many years pass. He finally makes his way home, and his entire village is in ruins. The only house standing is his own. He goes into the house, his wife is waiting for him. They have a very bittersweet reunion. They cry, they tell each other about the sufferings in their years of separation. They go to bed. In the morning he wakes up and his house is a ruin. His wife is gone. And he realizes that the woman that he spoke with and that he slept with was indeed his wife's ghost. She had died many years previously of grief because of his absence. And without anyone to offer the appropriate services for her soul, she had remained there at her home, waiting for him. And so he is able then to find the site where she was buried and to make the ritual offerings, and eventually she finds peace. So I guess I'll end with that story since I've run over a bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baruni. That Obaki story was something. She has a lot of those, so
You'd like to talk with her, she's at the religion department. Thank you. Now we'll have a few comments from our respondents. Did you, John Kempo? Who's going first? Okay, Makino is oldest.
Good afternoon. After Dr. Baroni's dynamic speech, I needed to relax a little bit. I wonder if, how many of you here non-Buddhist? Will you stand up? And exercise. How many of you are Buddhist? Thank you. How many of you are Buddhist? Okay, thank you very much. Just for my information. Listening to the Dr. Baroni's presentation, I come to realize there's a big difference between what Buddhism teaches or Jodo Shinshu teaches and what common people think what is Buddhism. And Dr. Baroni discussed from the standpoint of cultural context of Buddhism concerning death and memorial service type of things. And to respond to her presentation, I have lots of detail. Maybe I have to respond from the Jodo Shinshu point of view in the technicality. But since limited time, and besides somewhere there pressing the time, so I'm running. Anyway, I think I'm responsible and I'm expected to respond from the Buddhist point of view, or rather Jodo Shinshu point of view. And although there are many areas to clarify, and because of the time, I would like to focus on a couple issues. One is a Buddhist view toward the death, and meaning of memorial service. And the rest of the small detail maybe I cannot talk about today. The purpose of Buddha Dharma is to deal with the issues of birth and death, with suffering and pain and the anxiety that arises from ignorance, blindness, and attachment. Buddha Dharma teaches that death is a part of life, a natural course of life, and that not negative or positive. That's a reality. And that although none of us can predict what may significantly alter our lives, we are always embracing absolute wisdom and compassion to live fully, and therefore is to be prepared for all events with trust and serenity, and to avoid the morbid preoccupation with death and concern about what will happen to us when we die. Death clarifies life's truth. Dying is a part of human condition. To live decently, then serenity, leave this world, is a total fulfillment. This is, I'm quoting Reverend Fujitani's the article from this, so please read. Especially when you read about funeral, and Reverend Fujitani has a very nice article. Anyway, Buddhism is a way to transcend birth and death. Whether liberation from life and death, spiritual liberation. According to Shakyamuni Buddha, or his final word of Buddha, I'm quoting from the teaching of Buddha published by the Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai, quoting, "My disciple, my last moment has come, but do not forget that death is only end of physical body. The body is born from parents and nourished by food, just as inevitable sickness and death. But the true Buddha is not a human body. It is enlightenment. A human body must die. But the wisdom of enlightenment will exist forever in the truth of the Dharma and in the practice of the Dharma. He who sees merely my body does not truly see me. Only he who accepts my teaching truly see me. After my death, Dharma shall be your teacher. Follow the Dharma, you will be truly true to me. I lost. And then he said, make yourself a light. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend on anyone else. In these immortal words of Buddha, the Buddha taught us that there was something more important than the body. He was pointing to the power of enlightenment which all beings possess. Too often we are attached to the visible body and forget about invisible potential power which is human body possess to enlighten ourselves and to help others become enlightened. This is the true energy of human life that never perish. The physical body dies, but this energy never dies. Make of yourself light. These are powerful words. We must search for the inner light, which is infinite Buddha within. Nobody can find the Buddha for us. Each person must find the Buddha. And when we find the Buddha, we realize that it was this Buddha, the great power of wisdom and compassion that was operating within us throughout timeless time. So when Buddha was asked, when he was passing by, the disciple asked Buddha, what will happen? What shall we do after you die? Then he said, forget about it. Don't worry about it. The scholar will take care. The body is not important. As Shinran Shonin said also, same kind of line. When I'm gone, through the body into the Kama river and make it fish food. From the Jodo Shinshu point of view, once you realize this wisdom and compassion embrace us all the time, no matter what I am, whoever I am, just leave it to entrust to this great compassion. So Genja said, just die, entrust yourself. Or Ryokan said, shinu toki wa shinu ga yoroshi. When you die, just die. You know that maybe some of you heard at the hospital situation, older patients say, akirameru. And people maybe misunderstood. Akirameru, yeah, the common usage is give up. But from the profound meaning of akirameru means taikan, which is a great awareness, understanding, or great acceptance of the fact. This is a natural course. So it is not necessarily giving up, resigning, but great acceptance in peace. This is often used as a skillful means of turning the Dharma wheel, a meaningful and sacred opportunity to reflect upon the meaning of life and death. There was a saying, or an anonymous person wrote this: when you neglect your own death, your life floats and wavers. When you suddenly come to know your own death, your life crumbles. Only when you transcend your own death, your life will be fulfilled. So from the Buddhist point of view, death is not necessarily shock us or anything. About the funeral service or any memorial service, but any funeral service has a profound religious purpose, which is to affirm the oneness of deceased as well as our service with the infinite Buddha. The funeral had to pay to pay the respect of the deceased, and also the therapeutic value for those who survive. Any memorial service in Buddhist memorial service, especially Honganjo or Jodo Shinshu, after funeral, there are various memorial service we held. Weekly service up to 49 days, and 1 year, 30 year, or 100 day, 1 year, 30 year, 13, 17, 25, 33, and 50, or maybe 100. These are the memorial service held, but this is not for the sake of the deceased, but it is solely for the living. It is to remind us that life is transcendent and that we are warmly embraced in the compassion heart of Amida, Buddha. It is an act of consolation for the survivor and the way to encourage reflection concerning the matter of life and death. During the memorial service, traditionally, we read, the Shinshu priests read the Hakkotsu no Gobunsho, a chapter of ashes written by Renyo Shonin some 450 years ago in Japanese and translation. But the first portion stating the fleeting nature of human life. And then says, by so understanding the meaning of death, we shall come to fully appreciate the meaning of this life, which is unrepeatable, and thus to be treasured above all else. By virtue of true compassion, let us realize the unexcelled value of human existence, and let us together live with our Nembutsu in our hearts. So this life, unrepeatable, precious life, to live in the embrace of Amida's compassion. This is here and now we are talking about. So we don't worry about whatever happened, or soul or spirit. So anyway, this let me see. Make it. Nakamura Sensei doesn't have a time, so I'm just I would explain to second portion is to clarifying the meaning of memorial service in Jodo Shinshu point of view. I don't know where to skip. According to my psychiatrist friends, she said, psychoanalyst, she was saying, if grief is properly dealt with, it takes about 50 days or so to go through the process. Unless we deal with properly, especially when the loved one dies, many people go through deep grief, especially when the person did not have enough chance to grieve. Often it persists a long time without one's own realization, and which affect his life one way or others, unless it is properly dealt with. So this memorial service, especially first 49 days, for the living, for the survivor, to give a chance weekly, support from the family members and the relatives or friends come together, give enough support